So this is the final story of this week's that we're going to be covering. I probably should have started with it first because it was the one that I actually enjoyed the most. It is on PGCon, the Postgres conference, clustering and VODKA. So Postgres, it's the leading free SQL database. They're continuing to work towards adding the enterprise scaly features that the large organisation has. And so this story is a fairly sort of large, lengthy story that warbles on a bit. The two main features they cover are some of the indexing stuff that they've added for the JSON type, and some of the sideways scaling stuff that they've done. So I have used some of the NoSQL JSON-specific storage engines. So it's really interesting to see Postgres, which is very much a bastion of the SQL is the right way to do things. A sort of database coming out and offering really, really interesting, strong JSON support. The JSON-B type lets you store a chunk of JSON in a database cell. It lets you index that by contents. It lets you search that, and it can be an arbitrary tree of JSON data. So if you've got, it really lets you treat Postgres like it was a JSON document store. So you can pretty much put all of your MongoDB type things straight into a Postgres database and get all of the features that you would expect from an SQL type thing. You can't do SQL queries on the JSON data structure, but you can do they have a language which they still haven't got the right name for it yet, but at the moment I think they're calling it JSON SQL or something like that. You can do queries, searches, and indexing on the JSON types, almost to the point where you can treat it like an SQL-like object. And it certainly looks like it's already faster than a lot of the MongoDB stuff for doing equivalent things. They have a lot of experience at doing indexing of large blobs of data. So it's really, really interesting where they've been able to use all of the experience they've gained in the structured types, which is what SQL is, and attack a dynamically laid out document set and use all of that knowledge in a different problem domain and come up with something that's actually better than the tools developed for that problem domain. So I think that's really exciting, and I think this is probably the first nail in the coffin of the NoSQL movement, as it were. And the numbers that they give are pretty impressive, and this is all still betaware. But being able to load all of the data into the Postgres database is half the size of the equivalent Mongo database, and they're twice as fast as searching and indexing it as well. So it looks like they've already got Mongo beaten already at this stage.
Well, it wouldn't be difficult. I'm afraid this NoSQL thing reminds me of, since I personally experienced it, is sort of the young kids on the block telling their daddies that they were all wrong all along, and we should use eventual consistency, and then they discover that eventual consistency is bloody hard to get right. Bordering on impossible, and these wonderful things like ACID are actually really were the innovation they were touted to be 20 years ago. I didn't actually realise that this touched on it. I saw the replication bit and SQL replication is it's a mess.
It's horrible.
But yes, the JSON thing is interesting. I had exactly the same reaction to you. We're now bringing guys who actually know how to index and search data, and they're focusing their attention on JSON, and the results will be show all the other kids sort of how it's done. And this is exactly as you'd expect. I went through this with Ryan. He was looking for a database for his back end. He looked at all the NoSQL stuff, and I said, He said, but it's slower. And I said, it's only slower because it implements ACID. Now, you can forego ACID, and then it will be faster. Or you can keep ACID, and you can remain sane. And he didn't believe me, so we did a whole pile of benchmarks on a whole range of things. And I turned off transactional safety and all the rest on things like SQLite. And as soon as you do that, it beats the NoSQL databases. It just annihilates them, right? Even, you don't have to do anything special. You just have to turn off ACID, and the SQL things that they say are slow suddenly beat the NoSQL. And then, of course, he deployed his stuff without ACID turned on, and guess what? You'll be stunned to hear it got corrupted. Well, isn't that unusual? Who would have thought that?
They've had 20 years of optimising everything. So from the other side, there was a lot of this stuff seems to be funded by European organisations, and one of the projects that is using Postgres at the moment is a SkyMap project. Basically, they're taking a photograph of the entire night sky. They're doing that 8 times so that they'll be able to track movement, and all of this is going into a sideways scaled replicated database, Postgres database. And this particular project, it's funded under the European Union somehow. Looks the ESA, which I think is the European Space Agency. Sorry, Marco, for not knowing that. And they already use Postgres for some of their current work, and automatically going over these images and working out where things have moved in between the frames, and working out that that's a planet or that's a star or whatever. And they really like Postgres for that, and they're putting money into scaling it up. The thing that I'm slightly perplexed at, possibly, is that they're doing all of the analysis with Java on top of Postgres.
Well, Java talks to SQL databases really nicely. I mean, anyone who's dealt with struts or J2EE is probably in a world of nightmare. But the fact remains that
anything, if you're doing anything based on top of Hibernate or anything like that, which abstracts away from the underlying database, it's just a nightmare, because you're losing all the advantages of actually having a reasonable database underneath you.
No, I absolutely agree. I mean, but in using Java's, I've forgotten what the hell they call it, the JDBC interface.
Yep.
And Python's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, honestly.
Yep.
I mean, yeah.
Yep.
It's just that Java runs twice as fast and consumes 20 times as much memory.
Yeah, I think... So the satellite will download gigabits of data per day from its 938 million pixel camera.
Cool.
So they're using that to photograph the entire night sky 8 times, and then shoving that into a rather large Postgres database, and then running automatic analytics on that. I thought, just from a science point of view, that was a very cool sounding project. Yeah, and the article talks about a few different forks of Postgres, and a few... I haven't really followed a lot of this, but it looks like a few guys had some ideas about how Postgres could scale up, and they've gone away and had a couple of startups, and a couple of the startups seem to have eaten each other and been merged back into the fold and stuff like that. Yeah, there's a lot of there's a lot of sort of stuff around that that's not all that important. So one of the things that's interesting about Postgres is one of the things that they do is they have a what they call a commit fest. So all of the developers stop putting patches in, and they all have to review.
Oh, really?
Commits, like the right bit to the repository is turned off, and everyone has to go through the patches.
That's impressive.
And only review patches, and they do that for like 3 months.
So there are no code reviews outside of this period?
There are code reviews, but what happens is that they have a pipeline where they have a few trusted people as gatekeepers into the repository, and what inevitably happens every year is that those gatekeepers are not able to keep up with the patches that are sent to them, and they reach a certain point in time where it's like, we've got 1,000 patches in the backlog, everyone stop writing new features, and the only thing we're going to do for the next 3 months is go through these patch sets and work out which of them are valid or not.
God, it must be a big project.
Why don't they scale out the code reviews?
Well, everyone's trying to... So the question is, why don't they scale out the code review? And the problem is that scaling out... Everyone wants to scale out the code review, but particularly on a volunteer project, it's much more fun writing features than it is doing work, like code reviews. And the people that you want doing the code reviews are also the people that you want writing the new features.
Well, actually, vice versa, you want the best people doing the code reviews.
Well, yes and no, but it's really, really hard to get people to do code reviews, and this is true across all projects. And the Postgres way of doing it is just to say we're not accepting patches for new features until this backlog is handled, and they're going through a phase where they're trying to tweak that to try and work out what times things happen, because I think the way that Postgres works is it's an 18-month cycle between releases. Like, they have timed releases every 18 months. And if a feature is not of a suitable enough quality, it just doesn't go in at that point in time.
So they're just looking at... I was just wondering, do you know what they use as their VCS?
I don't know what they use as their VCS, but they... yes, it's Git.
They still didn't choose Gerrit.
And they don't choose Gerrit because they want to work with their mailing list software.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing about... for some reason, code reviews being automated, like we've been talking about code reviews since, when we did that quality course back at, I don't know, 15 years ago.
What colour were the screens back then?
Oh, mostly green.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and it's just now, like we have one code review thing called Gerrit, which technically is substantially better than all the rest and only works with Git, which indicates to me that given there's only one and only works with Git, that we've still got a little way to go.
I know of one.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things like...
Which one?
We have code reviews for everything all the time.
Yeah, but what do you use? Oh, something internal.
Yeah.
Which you've released as open source.
I don't know.
What's it called? I'll tell you.
No, I don't think we've released it.
Yeah.
It's similar to Gerrit.
Yeah.
I think there may be some cross-pollination.
And a lot of these things are based around workflows, and everyone's got a different workflow, and everyone likes to work things in a different way.
Well, that's the nice thing about Git, is it incorporates several workflows. I mean, not Git, Gerrit.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
It incorporates the right ones and all the wrong ones.
yes, but
From your point of view.
Yeah, well, the way that we do code reviews at work is slightly different to the ways I've seen it in other places. We mail... when someone pushes code, the patches get mailed around to people randomly. And when a branch gets merged in, that is also a patch that gets sent around. And for us, that works really nicely. It's not it's not as rigorous as using something like Gerrit, but in terms of like I'm stuck on a bus into work, what can I do? I can go through my patch folder and I can check that out.
You know, I'm smiling here because I remember reading the original papers on code review. And the major emphasis on those days was the size of the room and the position of each chair.
Yeah.
And times have... I remember reading that and thinking this is so much crap. But the concept was important and it's taken us, even though we're computer programmers...
It's all social stuff. Like, it's not a computer program.
It's taken us 20 years, I think, to implement that in software.
It's workflow, it's management, it's getting people to care about this stuff. It's not a technological problem.
The company I work at, everyone commits to head, and everything gets code review. There's pretty much branches are sort of maybe if there's some release management needed, but pretty much everyone commits to head. All my projects are committed to head. We have 0 branches on all the projects I work on. They all commit to head.
Excellent use of Subversion.
No, but truly, we have a system that's as capable as Git. We even have a Git front end on our system. And so
what do you use for VCS? Don't tell me it's another non-open source thing that you use internally.
We have every Google developer submitting to a single source repository for all their code.
You must be Google to manage such a huge friggin' source repository quickly.
It's my understanding they tried Git and it wasn't good enough because it couldn't scale.
Facebook does a very similar thing.
You tried Git and it didn't scale.
We couldn't scale.
It doesn't scale.
Git didn't scale. I mean, like, hi, I want to be able to do 400 merges per second. Okay, I want to do bigger number of merges per second. Okay, bigger. Oh, it broke. Okay, we have to write a new one. So we did. Anyway, there's a Git front end for it. But the change list numbers look like phone numbers. Everything's code review.
So this is the change list number that's been incremented by 1 since the beginning and has now got to a phone number size, is what you're saying.
Bigger than phone numbers. And the thing is, when you get your code number, when your code goes out for review, and you get a new number when it gets submitted, because it actually has to be sequential. All the code numbers are simply sequential. But everything gets code reviewed. It's just part of the culture. It's part of your job. We pick code reviewers. So I will write the code, and I'll pick someone to do the code review. And then for certain things, it might need a review by a team. So I'll put the team's alias in, and someone on that team will get a ticket or whatever their system might be. And there'll be code reviews. Sometimes you might need 4 or 5 code reviews.
So tell me, have you seen the code review go through for the implementation of TLS on XMPP?
I don't know. I wouldn't have seen it if it had gone through. Think about that protocol. Is it compatible with Google Hangouts?
Yes, you implement it. It implements Google Print, for example. It implements Hangouts. It implements...
I don't know. I literally don't know. I literally don't go looking at that stuff because then I can't answer their questions. But no, code review is critically important and we do it all the time. It's my obligation. I get code reviews. I basically have an SLA of, if you haven't done it by the next business day, then you demo better respond. It slows people down if you don't do it.
Yeah, I mean, it is really important to consider code review as part of the development process. It's not an afterthought. It's not something that you can leave until the death knell. It's part of it.
Yeah, some of our more senior developers do more code reviews than writing code.
Oh, I would expect so.
And they give, quick feedback. It's like, no, crap, don't do this, talk to Bob about how to do that better, move on. So, feedback. And then ultimately, looks good to me.
So there's some specific talk about speed ups that they can do inside Postgres.
This is an utterly boring talk. What are we talking about it for? This is an utterly boring article.
No, it's not.
It'll
it's
be
awesome.
finished in a couple of seconds.
So the keynote that they had was by the SQLite author, which was...
Is that him, is it?
Yeah.
He looks like Greg.
Well, I'm looking at the back of Greg's head, and
It's not that far, is it?
It's conceivable. There's a few years there. So yeah, that was kind of interesting. That there was a certain level of respect between the Postgres and the SQLite
Well, so that bloody well should be.
and they sort of see SQLite as the scaled down form of Postgres, which I thought was rather cute.
Well, talking about reviews and code, I believe that SQLite is the only one that has the certification level required for motor vehicles,
Right.
which requires that you test in C code, ampersand, each side of the ampersand. So whether it succeeds or fails within the if statement,
Right. Yep.
which is so not every line, every branch,
Yep.
every branch expression.
Yep.
And and I believe it's one of the very few, if not only, open source that has that level of unit test. I certainly benefited from LR parsing when I took all his SQL unit tests. Remember,
Yes. Yeah. And so talking about VODKA, which is the replacement for gin, which is a new index type, and it's specifically an extension to gin to enable multi-values on the reverse index. So specifically when you're dealing with tree structures like JSON, where you need to be able to have a pointer into the tree, not just a particular individual cell value. And some of the numbers from that are pretty cool. Yeah, and overall, it looks like the Postgres conference looks really interesting. And if I can ever get to go along and see it, I think I would. There's a lot of stuff covered there.
so what? PGCon 2016 for Brisbane?
Sure, why not? I may have moved on to other things, like being a hermit or something, but sure. Yeah, so it's a nice big story. There's a lot of details in it, but overall, those are the main points covered. So I think that's it for this week's edition. Thank you, Russell.
Thank God for that, Clinton.